And the main event at this year's Wrestlemania, not Stone Cold Steve Austin, not The Rock, not even the great Hulk Hogan, but a Pokemon Illustrator card worn around the neck of one eccentric Pokemon collector and much maligned YouTuber, Logan Paul. So, let's talk about that. But before we do, as we always do, let's roll that intro. Hey Gengar Gang, what is going on? My name is Ryan, this is the Analytic Gengar, and welcome to another video. In today's video, friends, we talk about Logan Paul's most recent internet-breaking purchase, the $5.275 million PSA 10 Pikachu Illustrator card. So, in today's video, specifically talking about this record-setting purchase, A, B, why it is important, and C, my own thoughts on an interesting bit of additional thought and consideration that I've had to this particular purchase and what it kind of signifies to the Pokemon hobby as a whole. Of course, as always, if you like today's content, definitely feel free to leave a like on the video, and the best way to support the channel is to subscribe and push us over that 1,400 subscriber count. So, with all that said, friends, let's get right on into this. So, as always, links will be down below. Here is the news per Ludkins Media. On April 3rd, 2022, so not that long ago, it broke that Logan Paul now owns a $5.27 million Pikachu Illustrator card. The Pikachu Illustrator card is one of the most famous vintage cards out there. It is also unanimously agreed upon to be one of the most rare trading cards from the Pokemon TCG, originally issued by CoroCoro Comics, with very few ever printed, and then even fewer graded, and then even fewer graded a PSA 10. So, long story short, very rare vintage card that is in very short supply. Having one in general is worth several $100,000. There are PSA 7s that have sold for multiple hundreds of $1,000s. Obviously, the PSA 10 would carry a significant premium given exactly how rare it is. According to the article, the world record for a Pokemon trading card has been obliterated by Logan Paul because he now owns this Pikachu card that he wore around his neck for Wrestlemania. More on that later. Now further information has surfaced about the price he paid, a Guinness World Record $5.275 million. So in an official statement on Guinness's website, Guinness then, formally came out and said, hey, here's the dealio. Logan Paul purchased the card, shockingly, quite a while ago, on the 22nd of July, 2021, for an incredible $4 million cash alongside a Pikachu PSA 9 Illustrator card purchased for $1.275. So his basis on that card was the total $5.275 million US. There he is with the card itself. Here's what I was just mentioning just a little whiles ago. Just last month, a PSA 7 Pikachu Illustrator broke the world record for a public sale when it sold for $720,000 US at auction via Golden, and then this private sale eclipses that figure. So that's one thing to bear in mind and take note of as you're thinking about this. The Pikachu PSA 7 Illustrator card broke the public record. Up till now, we did not know, but there was a private record set at $4 million. And then, put the two together, and the most expensive Pokemon card ever bought or sold was this Pikachu card that Logan Paul owns for $5.275 million US. Now, a little bit of information about the Pikachu Illustrator card, which you can see here on screen. Distributed as a prize in 1998 for winners of the Japanese magazine CoroCoro's illustration contest, there are reportedly only 39 cards in circulation, so this is what I was mentioning a little while ago about exactly how rare and in short supply this card is. And then, looking at the PSA population report on this particular card highlights the scarcity and the rarity of this holy grail of Japanese Pokemon cards. There are currently 24 graded variants, only one a PSA 10. So, this is the only PSA 10 in existence, and surprise, surprise, it is owned by the Logan Paul. And then the last thing that this particular article says is, what does this mean for the future of the Pokemon TCG hobby? Now, after reading this article, that's where I began asking myself that question and beginning to think, and I have some stuff to say. But before we do, in case anyone was curious about what Logan Paul decided to do with this uber rare Pokemon card of the most vintage of natures, Logan Paul wore that same card to Wrestlemania 38. And he now owns the Guinness World Record for the most expensive card. So Wrestlemania, for anyone who doesn't know, the WWE does this gigantic main event on pay-per-view every year. Many people probably watched it or heard people talking about it back when you were in grade school growing up. It was where like all the big championships were fought for, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so at WrestleMania 38, which is hilarious because when I was a kid it was in the 20s, so now I feel old. But at the 38, he wore this card around his neck, very similar in stunts to the Charizard card that he wore around his neck when he went ahead and fought Floyd Mayweather. So, interestingly enough, it was pretty, I expected something as crazy from Logan Paul, but to think he actually wore it around his neck is actually hilarious. Fun fact, he ended up fighting in a match because Paul wore his diamond-encrusted necklace as he and The Miz walked down the ramp for their tag team match, and not only did he win the match, but then he was awarded the Guinness World Record on the same night. And here is a picture from Guinness World Records Instagram showing his certificate for the most expensive public Pokemon purchase ever. Here it is, here's the card, here's Logan, probably post-match. And yeah, that's how that goes. So, interestingly enough, this is news for a variety of reasons. Now, I personally think this is another really interesting part of the Logan Paul story in the Pokemon trading card game. Obviously, there are many different things that are very, very unique about the particular card, about Logan Paul, and the fact that he has as much wealth as he does means that it's incredibly easy for him to swoop in and justify a $5.275 million purchase. Many of us would probably like that money to buy a mansion somewhere, in the world, but Logan Paul is wealthy enough that he's able to justify purchasing a card because of either his YouTube channel, his multiple streams of revenue, and his general overall wealth. So, that made me start thinking, what about the 1% of Pokemon collections that exist out there? And I ended up wanting to make this video specifically because of that. So, to walk, most people through this, it's really not a hard concept to grasp. In the history of Pokemon trading card collecting, right, ever since 1999 when they released in English, you have to figure that at some point, for the total population of collectors that existed, there was always someone on the higher end of the spectrum. Someone who had, quote-unquote, the best, most rare, and for very simple purposes, the most valuable collection in the world. And over the years, that has changed, right? We've seen the rise of collections, the fall of collections, we've seen collections destroyed, collections inherited, and because of that, at any given point throughout the years, there is a possibility that if you froze time and took a snapshot as of that date, you would see that there was a 1% population that controlled the, most significant or the most valuable Pokemon trading card collections that existed in the world. In fact, it's not even shocking nowadays to hear that there are multi-million-dollar collections out there, and much of this is primarily just driven by the sheer fact that people have been collecting for so long and for so in-depth a period of time that, they have very little to no basis in this stuff, and yet, because of the way trading cards have appreciated over several years, it has allowed them to, effectively just grow $1,000,000, $100,000, $200,000, $1 million collections over a period of time. So, if we look at a, wealth distribution chart, right, what we'll find is that there are a lot of similarities between the way this fundamental aspect of economics and the way our hobby behave. What I mean to say is that if you've ever heard the term 1%er or the 1%, it refers to this idea that a disproportionate amount of the population control a disproportionate amount of wealth in the world. And that same concept applies to Pokemon. So a disproportionate amount of collectors in our hobby control a disproportionate amount of the total amount of vintage Pokemon card product that exists in a particular given time. Now, what's interesting about our hobby is that Pokemon cards are continuously printed. The older ones are not, right? So certain things are frozen in time and will never change. For example, the Korokoro promo cards, or EX booster boxes, or first edition Charizards. You get my point. There are a bunch of cards that are obviously not ever going to be printed again, and because of that, those aspects of the trading card hobby are frozen in time. There's a finite number that exists, and there's chances are a increasingly lesser number of cards available on a given year, because you figure every booster box that gets opened as part of a rip and ship or something of the sort ends up reducing the total number of sealed product, but theoretically increases the number of cards that could be graded, that could be in a binder, etc., etc. What's interesting, however, is that modern cards continue to be printed. So, in theory, you could have, 1,000 Rainbow Charizards from Brilliant Stars, and you could stake your claim as saying, hey, this is a, $40,000 collection. Well, that's great and dandy, but if you're looking at just the vintage Pokemon cards, what you'll begin to realize is that our hobby is probably distributed just like what you're seeing on screen right now. So if you think about it, there are some big players in the game. I'll give the example of someone like Leonhardt, someone like Pokerev, someone like Cool Trainer Ryan, who all have pretty significant collections. And that's not even speaking about the person who this video is actually about, so Logan Paul, as well as someone like Gary, who we know for a fact has the most significant Charizard collection in the world, and hey, TCA Gaming, who is probably tied, equal to, or slightly below Gary in terms of overall Charizard power and control. So interestingly enough, if we look at that and we really kind of think about it, plus or minus a few folks who are collectors but are not on social media and don't make their holdings known, we have to assume the majority of the wealth, quote unquote, in this hobby, meaning wealth being defined as the amount of vintage sealed Pokemon cards that are currently in demand, or vintage graded Pokemon cards that are currently in demand, are probably clustered in this 1%, right? And we can define this 1% as a bunch of people. Now bear in mind, 1% usually doesn't have a positive connotation, but for today's video, we're approaching it from a very objective standpoint. 1% just means the total percent of the population that controls a stupid amount of the stuff that exists in this hobby. So try not to approach it with the same kind of connotation as you would when you hear it discussed in a political conversation or an economic conversation. So if we're looking at that, what we begin to realize is that the majority of us probably fall somewhere within here. Now, I am just going to go ahead and say that I'm probably somewhere in the 70th percentile / 30th percentile. I can, very clearly state that, especially after some of the videos I put out, that my collection is worth several $100,000. With that said, if I put myself right here, where would you potentially fall? Do you have a better collection than I do? Do you have a lesser collection than I do? I think that's an important question to ask because it helps us gauge how this curve specifically belongs to us. Now, you might say, Ryan, why are you talking about this curve? No one really cares. Well, remember, this is the Analytic Gengar, and contrary to popular belief and my jokes about Alina Lopez and Linity aside, I do occasionally try to take my job seriously and actually use data to try to inform my viewership about the Pokemon trading card hobby. Two things. My argument is that for the 99% of this curve, we do want to know what they hold and how much they hold, because bear in mind, Pokemon cards, unlike wealth, can't necessarily trade hands and flow in the same way, right? When you think about money, money isn't perishable. Money goes from person to person, and that wealth just basically gets redistributed. However, for Pokemon cards, it's a very interesting and precarious ledge, mainly because they're vintage collectibles, and because they're vintage collectibles, if the 1% who controls them chooses to consume them, meaning opening them, that means that the 1% who's in total control of, the majority of sealed vintage Pokemon cards can open them all up. Guess what that means? Even if you wanted to move somewhere closer or purchase one of those, cards or boxes, you no longer can if they choose to open all this stuff up. The other major important ramification here is that even if you choose to believe that you enjoy this hobby in a silo, in a vacuum, by yourself, with your binder, just enjoying your trading cards, at the end of the day, a major amount of publicity and a major amount of importance is placed on the people who can influence this hobby. And although the term social media influencer is also relevant to this conversation, I would care to argue maybe the top 10% of the wealth holders in this hobby are able to exert a significant amount of influence on this hobby as a whole. Case in point, many YouTubers will get free stuff from the Pokemon trading card game company in order to open, because Pokemon knows that Pokemon collectors, modern Pokemon card enthusiasts will watch those videos and will consume the same products that they see their favorite YouTubers opening up. And as a result, it makes sense that obviously the folks who have the most clout and influence because of their collection would also be able to influence, the Pokemon TCG as a whole. Bear in mind, even if you want to enjoy your hobby in a silo, you don't care about Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, my stupid jokes aside, at the end of the day, if you want to buy a pack of Pokemon cards, that may be driven by the influence other people have on this hobby. It's very frequently been pointed out that Logan Paul, the actual subject of this video, has brought an almost unfair amount of attention to this hobby and has artificially driven up demand and prices. Now, I've made the point in the past that, COVID, supply chain issues, and a variety of other things also were at play there, so it's really unfair to just point to him. But I do think, at the same time, there is a fair amount of blame that he can get, because yes, he did bring additional attention to this hobby, and for better or for worse, it did drive up demand. My argument, again, is that supply just couldn't rise to meet the level of demand, and now it can. But interestingly enough, don't forget that what we are seeing and what we have seen is that influencers do have a role in the availability of product. And as long as Pokemon can keep up their supply, there really isn't an issue, at least on the primary markets. But you'll also see demand for cards go to these types of levels where you're seeing $200, $300, $400 modern alternate art cards. And one could make the argument that that is primarily driven by the influence that some people have on this hobby. So, with all that said, friends, that's my thoughts on this particular scenario. Definitely let me know what you think down below about the rise of the 1%ers within the Pokemon TCG hobby. I think it's an interesting topic to kick around. I think it's definitely something that we need to be aware of, especially as we consider where collections are clustered, how products and vintage items are clustered within collections, and more importantly, what type of control those individuals can influence and exert over the Pokemon TCG as a whole. Obviously, in many ways, they can influence prices, they can influence demand, they can influence supply, and especially when it comes to vintage products, that can cause a lot of volatility in prices, primarily probably driving prices up. So, definitely something to think about, but let me know your thoughts down below. As always, friends, if you liked today's video, definitely feel free to hit that like button. And hey, if you're not already, subscribe to join the Gengar Gang. It's the freest and the easiest way to help support our happy little community. It's been a while since I made a video, so there is that. As many of you know, I had been struggling keeping up with a variety of work-related items, so hopefully we're back on track for normal releases this week, obviously Thursday and Saturday, and then fingers crossed next week, just back to normal Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday releases. And yeah, other than that, happy tax season, everyone. That's fun. And yeah, hit that subscribe button for more content. Other than that, friends, thanks again for checking out another video, and we will talk soon. Peace.